Hi, we're the Mind Body Couple.
I'm Tanner Murtagh.
And I'm Ann Hampson.
And this podcast is dedicated to helping you unlearn neuroplastic pain and mind-body concerns.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back.
Hi, everyone. Welcome.
We're pretty excited that spring is starting to happen again. I bet everybody is feeling the same way. It's been uncharacteristically warm here, which is actually quite amazing.
Yeah, one thing I always think about is, people in LA.
How it's warm all the time.
Like, do they get excited for spring, or are they like, oh, it's spring?
Well, I think so. Like, anywhere they get used to, like, certain weather or, like, wearing certain clothes. Like,
And don't you just wear summer clothes all the time in LA?
actually, so I was there recently, and people were actually, like, I think I was shocked. I was, like, in a tank top and everything, and a lot of people were in sweaters, and I was confused as to why. But
Yeah,
I think they...
because you were the Canadian, and you were like, this is as warm as it gets in Canada.
Well, that's right. They considered it, like, sweater weather, where I was like,
Yeah.
this is summer weather. So, yeah, I think, like, they have their experience of weather and seasons like us.
Even yesterday, we were walking around with just our shirts,
Yeah.
our sweaters,
Yeah.
and it was like 10 degrees. Like, it was
Right.
Celsius.
That's tank top, t-shirt weather for us.
It is.
But actually, it's going to be cold again next week, which is, how it goes here in Calgary. Up and down.
But you know who's more excited for spring?
Our dog.
Oh, our dog, Darla.
Yes.
Darla's got the spring fever.
Oh, yeah. She's kind of crazy and, like, nuts
She's
again.
destroying my garden.
Yeah, she likes to dig holes. She wasn't doing it that much before. It's like she calmed down, and now she discovered she can dig holes
the
again.
ground was frozen.
No, I mean before
okay.
that.
I don't know what happened. She dug a giant hole.
Ugh, and mud
yesterday.
everywhere.
Oh, it was
gross.
It was terrible.
Like mud or poo. It's hard to know what's what. Yeah.
So
we didn't know this about owning a dog.
Well, specifically, especially German Shepherds.
Right.
They love to dig.
Yeah.
So there's our update for you all.
Our house is dirty.
Our house is dirty. Darla's digging holes.
And spring is coming to an end next week.
Yeah, it's going to get cold here again.
Mm-hmm.
So luckily the ground will freeze and Darla will be out of luck.
That's the good thing about the cold returning.
It's a win.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Look at us making a positive spin on things, hey?
That's important.
I do. So our topic today, leaning in to the here and now.
Yeah, I like that. I like thinking of it as the here and now, leaning into kind of what's going on right in front of you.
Yeah. This topic, I think some people listen to it and they're like, yeah, I get it. Like, I think there's that response. I remember, like, when I was healing, I was like, yeah, mindfulness, Like,
yeah.
I know what mindfulness is.
Mindfulness is kind of everywhere.
If I was really honest, I wasn't actually using mindfulness, but...
Right, we could know it, but not use it.
But I was annoyed at any therapist who hucked that idea at me.
Too. Yeah.
But there's actually a lot to this.
Yeah.
Because when we talk about, there's a quote by Van der Kolk where he says, trauma is an inability to be in the here and now.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I like that quote, and I really equate it also to chronic pain and symptoms. Now, of course, they go hand in hand, trauma, chronic pain, and symptoms. But we're just pulled constantly out of the here and now.
Right.
We're just hyper-focused, hyper-fixated on our physical symptoms, what feels unpleasant.
Yeah.
And we're either flying into high sympathetic, we're so fight or flight, or we're completely shut down and numb in a dorsal vagal place.
And it makes sense. It makes sense why there's so much difficulty being in the here and now when there's chronic pain and symptoms.
Yes. And I remember that. I was never present.
No.
And the issue is to heal, we need to be present.
And it seems complicated because I agree with you. Like, being present is so important, and we'll keep talking about that throughout our podcast. But I can see why people maybe don't want to be in the here and now, or really just can't be in the here and now. So how do you make that shift?
Yeah, and then, this episode, we're going to give some techniques and strategies people can start to utilize. Mm-hmm. And we don't need to make this super complicated.
Yeah.
that's the beautiful part about this. It can be difficult at first because you're constantly getting pulled out of the here and now. But the practices are actually quite simple.
Yes.
It's just we need to be consistent in the way that we use them.
Well, I think that's a really good point, Tanner, because at least for me, when I used to think of mindfulness, I used to think of someone like on the yoga mat doing meditation, like really kind of like centered and, mindful, no cares in the world. And so that's not what we're talking about.
No, there's little moments that we need to do this, and we're going to talk about how you can do this in a way that cultivates safety. Because when we say leaning into the here and now, that can mean pleasant and unpleasant. Can be both.
Yeah.
We need both. Essentially, I've seen people on either side of the spectrum. They're always trying to lean into the pleasant, but I've used that many times, and eventually you're going to feel unpleasant. There's going to be dysregulation. There's going to be difficult emotions. Like, we're human beings. That's how we function. And then I've seen other people that, read a Sarno book or Schubiner's book, which I love their work, but then all they do is focus on the unpleasant.
Right.
They're like, I got to dig up these emotions. I got to feel them. Or they're just trying to sit with the dysregulation and process things. And that can feel a little too extreme.
Yeah.
Either side is too extreme. Like, we need a balance of leaning into the here and now in both ways. And so a great example, I had this one moment. This was, maybe this was 3 years ago. It was a while back. And I was out of pain at this point. But I was in a bit of a fear spiral in this moment.
What were you in a fear spiral about?
Probably work. Let's be honest with ourselves here. It's probably work.
Well, and that's, I think, an interesting kind of little side note that I know we've mentioned before. Even though your pain was gone, Tanner, you still would fall into this like habit of being in a fear spiral about other things.
This habit, this dysregulation. And it's taken me many years over time to create more regulation in my system. And I still falter. And I think that that's just human nature. And so at the time, I remember doing that. And it was a weekend and we were all going sledding. I don't think our daughter was born yet. Like, this was, maybe she was born.
Well, she's 4.
She's 4.
So, you do the math now.
I don't know where she was. But it was just, I don't know where she was.
We left her at home.
Well, no, we didn't leave her at home. You were probably with her. I think it was just me and Louis.
Okay.
It was me and Louis. We're not going to bring a 1-year-old sledding. That's going to be it's going to be a rough ride for them. So me and Louis were going, and as we started to walk to go sledding, like, I started to get like lower back pain. And I hadn't had this in years at this point. And I knew right away, I was like, okay, like, I've been in fight or flight for a little bit too long right now, and that's what's taking place. And it wasn't a very long moment, and it sticks out because, it shifted so quick, where I was like, like, I'm going sledding with my son. Like, he's stoked. He's pumped up to do this. And that's where I shifted my focus to. So I shifted my focus to be very present in the here and now, with my son being excited, with him being playful. We were going sledding. And the old me, when I was in chronic pain, would have been terrified. Like, I'm about to go down a bumpy hill with lower back pain. Like, this isn't going to go well. But my mind didn't go there. Now, I want to be clear with people. It was an easy shift because I had already healed, essentially.
Yeah.
It's going to be harder. Like, when I was first healing, it was definitely more difficult than this. But it was a moment where I naturally was in the here and now. I was present. We had a blast. It was only maybe half an hour or so. And the pain just, like, dissipated instantly.
Right.
So there was this shift, this intense shift that took place. Because if we can move away from the fixation, the frustration, the figuring out of our symptoms, and we can actually be in the here and now, sometimes what people experience is actually causes their symptoms to reduce or dissipate.
Totally.
Now, don't try to use all the techniques we talk about at the end of this episode as a way to make your pain go away.
Right.
If I had done that, it would not have worked. I can guarantee you. But there was such a shift in my nervous system state, in me being very present with my son.
Well, one thing I really like about that, Tanner, is you noticed the pain sensation, you're aware of it, and then you chose to kind of be like, okay, it's there, I understand why it's there, and then redirect.
Yeah. And it's harder. It's harder when we're very dysregulated.
Yeah.
Because the sensations can be so extreme.
Right.
And so it's harder to not hyper focus on them. And our brain basically learns to hyper focus and be preoccupied with them. So we are fighting that a bit as we go.
Mm-hmm.
But, making this shift to being very in the here and now
Mm-hmm.
makes all the healing work possible.
Totally.
If you don't have that, nothing else after is going to matter.
Well, why do you think, why is this piece so important?
Because whether it's emotions, regulating your nervous system, just leaning into nice sensations, whatever aspect of healing you're focusing on, or being in a relationship, there needs to be this present here and now focus.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I was saying at the beginning, it can be pleasant or unpleasant. Both
Sure.
are needed. But I think it's important people understand that this needs to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that can be very overwhelming.
Yeah.
Both for pleasant or unpleasant. Some people find it very overwhelming to focus on the pleasant. But this is essential when we're actually starting to heal.
Yeah, and totally. And practicing this, I like this idea of it can be really small. It doesn't have to be, something giant that you set up. Like I mentioned, this big meditation or anything. It's just kind of noticing and almost being aware.
Yeah. And it's incorporating it throughout your day. Because, it's great. If people can make blocks of time to do some of this work,
Mm-hmm.
that's wonderful. Do that. But it's also throughout the day. Can you be more here and now
Mm-hmm.
with whatever you're doing?
And allowing yourself to kind of recognize that and then be aware and take that as a win, even if it's small.
Yeah. And so one thing that I have people start with that can be very effective, and they talk about it in mindfulness and somatic experiencing, is this present moment sensing.
Mm-hmm.
It is so easy to do, and it can regulate our system so quickly when we know what works for us.
Yeah.
So sight, sound, taste, touch, smell. I got them all.
Good.
I practiced that a few times because I was like, I'm going to mess up these senses. But any of them, and the reason I say all 5 is everyone has a preference.
Yes.
Anne loves her warm tea.
Yes. And so that would be touch, feeling
touch.
kind of the warmth.
Yeah, or the warm liquid, right?
Yeah,
It's all
for
of it.
sure.
There's a sense of touch that you really like.
Mm-hmm.
Harry got your tea last night, though, so.
Yeah, my cat tries to get my tea bag after I've drinking it.
Harry's
it's really
addicted.
annoying.
Harry's addicted to the tea bags.
Yeah.
He grabs it and sucks on it. It's terrible.
It's really gross.
Yeah, it's really.
And you know what? Tanner actually doesn't tell me. He witnesses it
I think
and
it's so
just
funny.
says nothing.
I sit there and I just watch him do it.
Anyways, yes. But I in those moments, you're right. That's an easy spot for me to be present sensing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's something that you've just incorporated in your day.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something that you found your nervous system naturally likes.
Yeah.
That's when you move in that direction. Don't force using a sense that doesn't work for you. So,
Yes.
for example, with Anne, sounds is never going to be your sense.
No, I feel like we've mentioned this a little
Yeah.
bit on the podcast before. I really struggle with sounds. I'm very sensitive to noise, except when I'm out in a barn setting. Then sounds actually is my favorite to lean into.
Mm.
So that's interesting too, of okay, when do I like a certain sense? When do I not?
Because with these present moment sensing, there is so much to play around with. Because I want people to explore this because your nervous system will naturally move towards certain ones that you may not cognitively think about.
Yeah.
You may not logically think, oh yeah, of course I'll like this. But you want to explore this a bit.
When you first started exploring this, Tanner, what did this do for your pain and symptoms? What did this do for your nervous system?
One thing it gave me is it gave me a safe place to go.
Okay.
Well, I was still in the here and now. So even, present moment sensing when doing emotional work or work with the nervous system is really essential because if people get overwhelmed, you can naturally swing. You can switch to focusing on a sense. So instead of just shutting down and going numb, you can actually shift between the two, which is really essential, allowing yourself to shift back and forth. And so for myself, it really allowed me to be in my life. Plus, it moved the focus from always being on the pain or symptom.
Right.
Which is really essential with a lot of this. The other thing that kind of adds to this is the skill of savoring.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's called leaning into pleasant sensations by Alan Gordon.
Yeah.
Deb Dana calls it savoring. Everyone calls it a different thing, but that's what we're doing. And, it could be the senses. But when I went sledding with my son, that's what happened. I savored that moment.
Mm-hmm.
There was a bit of ventral that came out in that where I felt safe and connected.
Yeah.
Now, what I hear a lot about is, people don't want this toxic positivity.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not what I mean. Because, toxic positivity is not going to be helpful. Like pretending everything's good no matter what, it's not going to be useful. Pretending that you feel safe when you're actually in a situation that does have some danger to it, it's not going to be helpful. But everyone throughout their day, no matter how dysregulated they are, they have small moments. These small, sometimes they're called like micro moments where they're in ventral, where they have, a little bit of that safe, connected energy going on. And we need to be very aware of that and savor those when they happen.
Well, you're right. And that's the idea of leaning into it. Sometimes they just kind of come along throughout the day, or we can kind of intentionally try to tap into that, like leaning into a nice memory and purposefully doing that. Or going, like for me, I might intentionally be like, okay, I need my warm tea. And that will be very conscious.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the thing is sometimes they naturally occur, which is beautiful. I love that. And sometimes we can intentionally bring on like a sense or some type of activity and then lean into the experience. So these two are things that I talk about a lot. And I noticed on YouTube there are the videos that have some of the lowest views.
Which is so funny because this is so like really in terms of healing such an important subject. So why do you think that?
I just think that people, and I get it, like when I was there, like I really wanted to focus on like what are the specific techniques for processing my emotions and doing all those things. And I'm not saying that like all of that is very important, like it very much is. But what's missed out is people are not being present as they go about their day and they're not in the here and now. And so even if some of these things you've heard about lots, it's asking yourself, like, am I consistently doing this?
Totally. And if I'm not, kind of learning how do I implement this? How do I put it in the practice?
Yeah. And I think overall, part of this is just practicing being in our body with both the pleasant or the unpleasant. The dysregulation that we might be feeling, the pain or symptoms, like somatic work, somatic tracking is meant to do that. But we also want to practice being in our body with what feels nice.
Yeah.
And so when we talk about simple practices, like I almost tell people if they're very disconnected from their body, it's like, 5 times a day, set an alarm in your phone and you're going to pause and you're going to be in your body for 2 or 3 minutes, as long as it's not too overwhelming, because you can do the pleasant as well.
Yes.
But we need to give ourselves practice being in the here and now, in our body, in our nervous system.
Yep.
And so these are very simple things, Sometimes this is why people do breathing or yoga or qigong, because it can be very effective in actually having us bring ourselves back, bring our attention back to the body.
Well, and something's interesting is when I talk to people about this who have started practicing this for like a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, they notice a big shift. Yeah. And it's not always like a giant decrease in symptoms, but they notice kind of be able to be more regulated throughout their day, maybe not as bothered by symptoms, not as much in like spiraling out. And so people do notice a shift, but there's something about practicing this.
Yeah. So this is your task for anyone listening. It's a good task. Practicing being in the here and now.
Yeah. Being aware, noticing, and leaning in.
And I think it's important to understand that this is mind-body work.
Totally.
This is trauma work.
Yes.
It really is. Like this is part of, if anyone listening has trauma, this is part of healing trauma. We need to give ourselves access to being in the here and now with both pleasant and unpleasant.
Yeah, for sure.
As we're kind of going. So that was a little short episode.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm going to go upstairs and hang out with Darla.
I'm sure she'll like that.
I'm going to try and, not let her in the backyard because
Yeah, no.
it's just going to be a mess.
Let's just keep her inside until next week when it's cold.
These are the problems we have.
Dog problems.
Dog problems. This is what happens when you have 5 animals in a house.
Yeah, it's a lot.
It's a lot. No more animals.
Okay.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone for listening.
Thank you for listening.
And we will talk to you all next week.
Talk to you next week. Thanks for listening. If you want to book in a session with one of our therapists, you can go to our website at painpsychotherapy.ca.
You can also follow us on Instagram at Pain Psychotherapy, where me and Anne are posting content daily and are there to respond to your comments. Also, check out our YouTube channel, which is named Tanner Murtagh, MSW, RSW.